let me give a little context to why my interest and I would say my passionate commitment to leadership from the Indic thinking and Indian knowledge systems thinking emerged. Being formally trained at Harvard and having done my fellowships on leadership there and understanding development policy from a Western narrative, fortunately or unfortunately, my education came, that part of my education came from there. At the time when I went there were no policy schools in India. Not that we really have policy schools based on Indic thinking still in India. I'm hoping that someday we'll be able to set it up. Though we give the tag very comfortably nowadays, especially all engineering colleges will say we have a IKS cell. But they think teaching Sanskrit is IKS. And we have to, maybe it'll evolve. Maybe they'll understand that as they go along, but Sanskrit just one step maybe in the direction. So my journey also was to think that the West would possibly give us answers. And when I went there, I realized that they don't, at least not for Indian problems, or the way we look at situations and structures. That's when I was left restless with the idea that if a product is not culturally appropriate and contextually relevant, it may not be the framework in which we can identify solutions. So the initial prism itself is wrong, and then we hold on to a prism which is fundamentally flawed and then try to discover solutions. Unfortunately, most of our education, I'm hoping that NEP will actually take roots and then it will change, but till then, the result of our educational system, which is at least definitely for me, maybe some of you young people, it might have started altering, at least in the IITs today. It's different, but the kind of background I came with was the difficult situation where I couldn't appreciate how what I knew, I actually did not even know what I knew, but what I thought I knew and I learned from outside were not actually enough to handle the problems I was faced with. So I was faced with the problems of development, faced the problems of an insensitive public system, the government, and difficulty of reconciling this. So I was a very outspoken activist, suing the state all the time, doing my satyagrahas. So I've sued the government of India, the government of Karnataka, taken them to all kinds of courts, human rights commissions, all the commissions that we could think of. No, I'm myself part of a commission, so it's thankfully something else now. So it's essentially an activist, got beaten up, arrested, everything that happens. But what I realized was one powerful statement, and my inspiration and life's work has got fashioned by Swami Vivekananda's message. And his construct of practical Vedanta and his understanding and appreciation of saying that all knowledge is within you. It's only that spark. And he gives a very powerful Western example when he's explaining this. That's Vivekananda is a master teacher. He realized that he's not going to be confined to the boundaries of India alone. So when you talk of Vedanta, it is always practical Vedanta. And you would say, don't see it as dry. They see it as much more than what it is. And he would always try to connect it to Western examples, and that's just his mastery. Because he realized that our world should go to the outside world. And in the example he gave here was, he said Newton was not just sitting there and then suddenly God gave him the darshan and said gravity is this and the apple fell. He said the knowledge of gravity was embedded in Newton. The spark of the apple falling brought it out. Now it looks very silly, but many of us have this intuitive learning. And I can explain to you, when I was doing my research on PM's leadership and talking to him one day, I realized that a lot of his thinking and his insights are very intuitive. And I connect it to plugging into the super consciousness and how do you respond to it. And in a very scientific way, we can talk about it. I won't divert now. Let me come back to this. So what struck me was, is there some way that my own experience of 40 years then, around 30, 35, 40 years then, of understanding people, living with them, living in the forest, seeing traditional chieftains operate leadership. They're also operating public systems. See, we also mistakenly think a public system has to be a state-led public system. But anything in a community, embedded in community, which is a public space for people, is also a public system. And to me, the classical place where knowledge, if at all some knowledge is embedded still today, and though it's getting diluted rapidly, is the traditional indigenous public systems. So their own methods of jurisprudence, there are a lot of things that we can learn from them, to medicine, to just life, sustainability. So I realized that a lot of knowledge is there, and why am I going outside? So that journey took me to recrafting how I wanted to look at are, and most of it, I would hesitate to say my knowledge is IKS. It is driven more by India's scriptural wisdom. So I want to clarify that. And I see a distinction there because there's so many other powerful things in the Indian space, that's irrigation to drinking water to sanitation to different ideas that have come up from the civilizational wisdom that we have. So civilizational wisdom is enormous. But within that construct, a substantial part of it that comes from our various scriptures are not just religious texts. That's again another fundamental mistake we do. Right? There's a body of knowledge that's codified and made available to us in different ways. So to me, I said, okay, let me start off very simplistically. Let me look at how many of you, a lot of young students are there. How many of you have actually read the Jataka tales? And most of you would have read it as Amar Chitrakatha comics, because that's where it came to me at least, and Chandamama, right? So our source of information is it's not wrong, at least we got something, right? And all our understanding of the power of the stories with the Amar Chitrakatha's last line, moral, and then one line, right? So essentially trying to force us to accept a particular way of interpreting the entire story, right? Which is not India's way. India's way as story was a powerful expression left to us to reflect on and relationally share it in a group of people as in the Gurukulas and then come up with possibly 8 different ways of morality can be interpreted. So the power I'm not saying Amar Chitrakatha or Jataka tales is not important to us. It's important. It gave us one way of looking at it. It facilitated us to appreciate something deeper than what we could have understood otherwise. But you look at Tom and Jerry. It is continuously filled with it is highly creative, but completely impossible. 2 animals doing what they're doing, and both of them getting bashed up all the time, but both surviving and being normal. All that stretches your imagination to the deepest, but it doesn't ever create the space to reflect. If you look at the cartoons. But the fundamental construct of the cartoon is entertainment. Jataka tales also packages entertainment with so much of depth in it. Then I realized, what are the leadership messages in this, the way I could understand. Then I went to Panchatantra, the power of the stories there. Again, beyond the Amar Chitrakatha comics. Then I thought, why are we even considering Bhagavad Gita as a conversation between God and man? And if it is a conversation between God and man, born out of an inherent conflict that all of us go through every day, every moment of our lives maybe, then shouldn't that also tell us how to lead our lives? Shouldn't that also be an enormous body of knowledge, how to lead itself? And if it's the symbolism of being a battlefield is many ways, it can be interpreted in so many different ways. So I realized that the power of the Gita is not because God gave it to us, or call Krishna God, or call him what you want. But what I realized from the first chapter itself is, it is possibly the greatest work of collaboration you can see. Because if Arjuna did not have Vishada, there is no role for Krishna to be the counselor, mentor, guru at all. So Krishna by himself couldn't have given the Bhagavad Gita if the set of ecosystem approach of our life itself had not been unfolding. The Pandavas, the Kauravas, the storyline of allies. So what happens in a real life situation is so beautifully embedded in this concept, but do we have the reflective capacity to drag it out, package it and use it, because it's all relevant today. Today the world unfolds exactly like that we have not been able to connect the dots. So then whether it is Atmabodha or Viveka Chudamani or all these different treatises that I started relooking it, not from a lens of just discovering Advaita, but how do you communicate? How do you actually understand? When Mihaly describes flow in a very beautiful English language after his research, why doesn't that connect to the Advaitic oneness that we talk about in every other space? And we just dismiss it off. But we get fascinated with the book of Mihaly, but we don't get fascinated with Viveka Chudamani. And we think it's not possible. So I started looking at all this and said, how do we frame this as a usable tool for this nation, for the current generation of young people, not in a language of the Gita and Upanishads, substantiated with all the citations and references, but present it to them as a usable understanding of leadership. So that's what I'm going to do. So my talk begins with, how do you define it then? And how is it different? How does the West define it? And where is the fundamental difference between the way we see leadership? Now, India never saw leaders. India actually saw exercise of leadership. The West it's a noun form that the West understands. India has imitated it now. That's a tragedy that is the way where IKS has been lost for us. No, the real power for us it was not about being a leader, it was about exercising leadership. That's the fundamental distinction that we can see. And being a leader means getting your identity from your followers. The West has this popular adage, when you look back and if you have nobody, then you are not a leader. But we say there's no question of you and other at all. The merging of the you into the other is what the beauty of our leadership, and that's something very deep to understand. But for the fundamental constructors, it's not about being a leader. I'll just use the paradigms, and as we have the question and answer, maybe I can explain further. So how would you define it then? If you define it as an activity, I would define it from the way I see the Bhagavad Gita and draw inspiration from that. It's an activity, it's karma, it's action all the time. Krishna says you cannot but act, right? And that's the power of it. So leadership is an activity. Activity of doing what? Fighting a war or talking like this now? So it's an activity of mobilizing oneself, which means my own capacities, my knowledge, my resources. It could be my money, it could be my stakeholders. Listen, I am irrelevant if without all of you sitting here in this room. Essentially, it means if I don't mobilize your attention, which is very critical for my expression of leadership at this point of time, then I'm not exercising leadership, I am just lecturing. There's a distinction. Because if I have to craft my appreciation of leadership as a useful end product for society, which is what I'm going to define it as now. So leadership is an activity of mobilizing oneself and others around us for something societally constructive. By spending 1.5 hours here, I know I had to struggle to take time off and come today, but I promised Nomesh I'll be here at this time. But what inspires me is not my promise to Nomesh. What inspires me is the joy and opportunity that I might get by mobilizing each one of us here, including me when I come here and all of you. Because like I said, without Arjuna, there's no Krishna. And without Krishna, there's no Bhagavad Gita. And both of them together is what actually is the end result. So it's an activity of mobilizing oneself and others around you for doing something societally constructive. And that's something which is powerful because there's a tacit appreciation of what is societally constructive. You don't need a definition, a parameter, a measurability. This is a tacit appreciation. But the West also will agree to this in one sense. But what is the last qualifier which especially indicates amid enormous uncertainty? And that's what the Gita gives us the power to say, still do this all, because if you're doing it with phalatyaga as a intent, the enormous uncertainty disappears. Because it doesn't matter to you. Because the outcome of your activity is no longer relevant. Because your focus will be on the activity and the action, and which means you give your 100% to the action. And in my own life, I have struggled to try to do that. It's very difficult. The only person which I have actually seen, and that's why I decided to write the book about him. I'm not a Modi Bhakt or anything like that. I'm just a person who works in the Capacity Building Commission. An opportunity of reporting to him and meeting him regularly means an observational opportunity for an author. So when he gives his 100% to what he's doing. And the power of now, which Eckhart Tolle writes so beautifully and lucidly, but that is what the Gita is all about, without carrying the burden of the past or the fear of the future. That giving that space of not worrying about the consequences is what is powerfully Indic. So we sometimes think Indic means our temples, rituals. They're all Indic. I'm not saying they're not. But if we can capture the paradigm of all that and then present it in a utilizable toolkit for our youngsters, my belief is that is what will shape the future India, and it will still be a modern India. Because we think anything traditional is not modernism. But traditionality, if we don't learn from our past, we can never craft a great future. And that is something which our universities are not teaching, because the universities teach you to say that anything in the past would be rubbish. I myself thought that the kashaya my mother would give me when I had fever, she must be out of her mind. Paracetamol is easier to swallow. But today I know that I wish I knew all the secrets she had. Once in a while, every other day I call her up, she lives in the US, and tell me how do you put this. And then she is very clear. She says, when I used to make it, they were all actual good herbs. No, I don't even know what your herbs are, so it may be more poisonous than the kashaya, so don't drink, she said. You take your paracetamol itself. But restoring that kind of a community existence is also public systems. Our public systems includes agriculture, it includes the herbal medicines we took, it includes the practitioners of this medicine. In Karnataka itself, I did a study and survey. I had discovered 19,000 traditional practitioners. Now, we will not believe in them because I am trained to be an allopathic doctor, which says every other system of medicine is useless. We are the only system of medicine. And then it's like saying that mine is only God. And the tragedy is, Indic thinking is, there's never a position of mine alone. This could also be true, that could also be true, and that could also be true. It's like 5 men with an elephant, right? 5 blind men with an elephant. Everything is truth. And Vivekananda said, life is a struggle to move from one level of truth to the next level of truth. At that level of truth, it's a truth for you. But it may not be the truth, right? And that's a struggle, that is sadhana. So leadership is appreciating that you're constantly operating in a context which might appear truth for you at that time, but may not be the truth. And giving it that openness, that space, which is what is essential for a person. And Keegan, in his westernized research, powerfully articulates it as an evolution from a socialized mindset to self-authorizing mindset to a self-transformational mindset. India spoke about the self-transformational part, where you're able to see these powerful different kinds of realities. And the journey of leadership, the way India understands it, is the ability to move from one, it is getting as close to reality as possible. Now, that is the beauty of Viveka Chudamani, by constantly saying, neti, neti, neti. And we just think that not this means how can it be? But that ability to discover the illusory part of our appreciation of reality and the real reality is the journey that we all undertake, and that's the journey of leadership. And that's why I called leadership is a spiritual journey. And if you undertake it the way I am saying, it's spiritual journey. And if your spirituality starts manifesting, that's also powerful leadership in action. Because India always looked at the other. And so my definition was, the way I would describe it in a powerful Indic way, is it's understanding the self. It's Svadhyay, the way Gita says. Not just the self, understanding the other. Because when we start our journey, the Bhagavad Gita allows us to see the other. That is why there are Kauravas and there are Pandavas. It takes a long journey for us to become the other or to merge into the other. So the separateness of self, other and action is the way you begin your journeys. And that's a practicality of Indic thinking. We don't complicate life by saying Advaitic experience, and all of you will run away from this room, including me. Because it's such a complex abstraction, to articulate it in an absorbable space itself is very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, at least I can't do it. But I thought, instead of that, let us begin this. And Krishna says, as many people, so many paths. And the easiest path is, I am this, I understand myself as what I am, who am I, why am I born. And for public leadership, it's very critical. And then move on and say, who are the others around me? And for public leadership, it's very practical. The citizens of this country whom I serve, the other I have to understand. And the actions that bind the self to the other, the kriya that binds the self to the other, that is what brings the attitude of the kriya. How I see myself, how I see others, and how I see action itself is an attitude. And today, I am very proud to say that India, for 77 years, imitated blindly the West as its foundation for building the public leadership of this country, today has its own competency framework. Every single learning product that this country will have from now on, from last month, October 19, Prime Minister officially cleared it and launched it. It is based on the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads. And well, the words are Sanskritized and the meanings are English, but the framework is very Western. So the West can easily see this and say, wow, this is so powerful. I tried something today, I didn't tell Ankit this. I went to ChatGPT and said, what do you know of the Karma Yogi competency model? The damn thing already knows quite a bit. Right? We have only put up the model in our website. And then I didn't stop there. I said, can you compare this with the global best frameworks? And it gave me a table. And the table looked reasonably legitimate. It was not hallucinating. I was wondering whether it's hallucinating. And I was proud to say, within a month of it being out, if it's getting noticed so much on in the internet space at least, I'm sure after a year or two of using it and proving it as something classical, public leadership will be the Vishwa Guru for the world. And I'm not even worried about it. So let me come back to the definitions. So to me, what mattered to us is the work at the center. Kriya mattered, not the karmic. It is not about I should be seen to be doing the work. No, we have one of your alumni, right, who keeps saying, I will fight corruption, I will do this, I will do this. Right, but that is not And I was part of the team Anna too, so it was all about the struggle to say, I am doing it. But corruption should be fought. Indic way of thinking is corruption should be fought. It is not about I should be seen as fighting corruption. And that's a very powerful distinction. The West cannot exist. You cannot run a company in the West if you don't say, I am the CEO. The CEO should have his employees facing problems. And the employee should take the problem to the CEO, because how else can you validate the existence of the CEO itself? The real Indic way of thinking is losing your identity of CEO itself. And that is not easy for us. Managing hunger is today a powerful workshop in the West. Indriya Nigraha is a demand of Kautalya's Arthashastra. If you cannot understand Indriya Nigraha, he says you can never be a Raja, you can never enforce Rajadharma. Look at public leadership, the way India unfolded it. For us, we just hold on to the two sentences he says. He says Loka Sangraha and Yoga Kshema are the principal responsibilities of the Raja. It will not happen automatically, he says, just by positionally occupying the Raja's role. He says only if you reach a state of Indriya Vijayi, you should be victorious. So Viveka, the way you can distinguish reality from the illusory world, in a practical sense also I can break it down. Vairagya, where you don't get attached to your work and to the ability to stay, go to the balcony, be an observer, see it from a distance and then recalibrate and act. And finally, Vijayi is not about winning your battles, it is winning your battle over yourself. And that can happen only if Swadhyaya is understood. So public leadership means giving space for the expression of your inner abilities. That's why my book is called Power Within. And recognizing the power within everybody around, elevating yourself to suddenly realize at some point of time it might come that all this power is interconnected to that one superconscious power. If you can appreciate it as an experience, nothing like that. Until then, Vivekananda says, have faith that I understand it's true, so please believe it. It looks a very silly way to start the experiment, but he says start with belief and then finally disprove that my belief was wrong. That's also one way of experimenting, because we have been trained to think the Western way, that we say we need the proof first before the experiment. Somewhere even West also starts it that way, no? How do you, somebody challenged me and said, I read how many of you read this Calvin comic? Very powerful, very nice, right? And then the way every day is, I wait for the Indian Express, not for the news nowadays. For that, each day is a very powerful message. That guy is really brilliant in his expression. But I always say, how, what a nice way. Calvin is explaining his reality and says, if there's a heaven, will tigers and men stay in heaven together? And then suddenly Calvin realizes, in that heaven, he says, tigers will not eat men. It will be a happy place. And then the tiger is thinking, but will it ever be heaven for me if I can't eat men? This is one level of truth, the next level of truth, the reality, how it is altering. And whose reality is real? Most of us operate our leadership based on our appreciation of reality, not the reality at all. And we are stuck on it, and that's why conflicts happen. So for public leadership to emerge as something expressively good for society, we should be able to understand all this. And so for me, all this matters. More importantly, today neurobiology distinguishes the power of the prefrontal cortex. A lot of my work has been the neurobiology of leadership. There are very three critical components for leadership. First is the power to, Vivekananda says, heart, head, and hands. In his own way, the 3 H he says. Emotive part of the brain, the basal part of the brain is very critical. You have to understand what excites you, what gives you the passion, because you cannot create a life purpose without having passion for it. If I passionately believe I can eliminate poverty in this world, that is my beginning point. I have to believe in it. Or I passionately believe I have to become a billionaire tomorrow. That's also a belief, nothing wrong in it. We have to believe in something. That belief is an emotive construct. That happens on the basal part of the brain. But belief alone is not going to work, because the Western world defines leadership as motivation, strategy, and action. For us, motivation is emotive. Seva is the most powerful emotive expression you can get. And Niswartha Seva is much more powerful emotive. And Vivekananda says it so beautifully. He says the national ideals of India should be Tyaga and Seva. Tyaga is the ability that emerges from the Vairagya that you can generate. And look at the call he gave so beautifully. He didn't possibly spend time explaining it. He left it to people like us to write about it. Otherwise, we'll have nothing to write a book about, right? So we also need some material to interpret these kind of messages. So for in a real world, that emotive part of the brain kickstarts your journey of leadership. Why should, just imagine, 1.5 million people, I keep struggling with this, 1.5 million people take the UPSC exam. Well, I have no control over the UPSC exam. Only after they take it, our job starts. So we are not the gatekeepers. It's a constitutional body. They are the gatekeepers. We inherit them after they enter the gates. But then there's a Puja Ketkar in the world also, but the remaining 682 people were not Pujas. Nobody notices it, no? Because we are all trained to see the dark cloud. We don't see the silver lining. The best get selected. The toughest exam in the world. Many of you in IIT Delhi's dream about writing the UPSC exam and come there. It's comic and tragic, both for me. But no judgments on that, but the toughest part. Why do they choose to come? The same kid in the same class takes a 1 crore job. Somebody else goes abroad to do a master's. The third person says, I'll spend money and get into a tutorials in Kota or some other place and come and write or Rajendra Nagar. What other Nagars are there, I don't know. And come back and write the exam and get into government. Take a 70,000 rupee entry salary. What inspires him? What motives him? What makes him? There's something powerful. That is that emotive part of the brain, right? The desire to serve, maybe. Others, you cannot say that 70,000 is enough for life. There is something to say that I want to, and we can't simply simplify it and say it's for power. I can tell you the power you'll enjoy is joke. That people think they enjoy. Maybe North India will have some signs of power. South India, you'll not even be noticed if you're a DM. They'll say, so what? People walk by the DM's house, they want you to know whose house it is. They'll just walk by. Maybe North India, Babu hai. So it's a different issue. I'm seeing all these differences now. But the point I'm trying to make is something inspires them, right? But that alone is not enough. Then you think and say, how do I express this emotion? Maybe take a UPSC exam, or somebody like me go into the forest. I can serve there. We all form our own strategic choices. That is the cognitive part of the brain. But which part of the brain decides? It's the prefrontal cortex, which captures the heart and the head and then decides on action. Today we know, because of fMRIs, the thickest, the maximum densest part of the neurons that come from the cortex and the basal part of the brain, the emotive fibers and the thinking fibers. Today we know they all flow into the prefrontal cortex. The funny part is when I graduated as a doctor, we did not even know what the prefrontal cortex did. We simply decided that like an appendix, it's an appendix organ. Maybe it did something 100 years to 1,000 years ago, but today we don't know. But today, because of non-invasive imaging techniques, we know that is the most important part of the brain. And when our Patanjali and others describe it, such an important part, right? And they may say between your forehead, etc., but it's still the seat of consciousness. Today we can appreciate it, but more importantly for leadership, it is a seat of executive decision making. All your ability to process emotion and cognition and then decide what is the best decision comes from that part of the brain. And Dalai Lama has run experiments in association with a lot of universities abroad, where the more you meditate, and when you do an fMRI, the more red is the prefrontal cortex. A 7-year-old child meditating, a 70-year-old man meditating, and they didn't stop there. They gave them simulations of leadership decision-making opportunities. Most of these monks had no idea how these corporates function, from complex aviation industry to ATC decision-making, and planes are coming. What happened yesterday is now it's proved to be a very difficult lack of decision-making and judgment of humans. And those kind of opportunities, and these monks were giving the right answers. And people are stunned because the prefrontal cortex was able to provide executive decision-making with that power. So managing your heart, body, mind, and soul was a very, very integrated, wholesome understanding of leadership in India. We never even bifurcated it. That is why yoga was as important as Ayurveda, but yoga is always uniting your body and mind. It was very well thought through. And for us, reflective thinking was as important as repetitive thinking. Language was a very powerful scientific emergence. So whether Sanskrit or whatever you look at it, they're all highly advanced states of the mind. So meditation and pranayama was as important to keeping your ahara tattva that we talk about. And I have now, my own research says, if you can identify 7 natural colors on your plate, preferably vegetarian and preferably uncooked. It's very difficult to do that. The ability of your prefrontal cortex to operate at the highest possible optimal efficiency is that. So by sheer diet, we can actually express ourselves leadership-wise. That's the power of the body, the heart, body, mind, and soul. So some of my leadership workshops, even the menu I would give like this. The 4 days or 5 days they are with me on the workshop, they have to actually eat the way I taught them. Hopefully it will become a permanent thing. It's very difficult in this world to lead. So my way of looking at it is, public leadership is a lot of things. Finally, it's just decision making. But preparing yourself for that, the way you communicate. We teach in public leadership dispersive models of communication, the semiotic schools, and then the participatory methods. But 3,000 years ago, Bharat had cracked the code in Natya Shastra. He had described Sadharanikaran, which is possibly the near perfect communication tool you can give to a public leader. Prime Minister Modi lives it. Not that he specialized himself in Sadharanikaran, but it's just an expression. He's built his entire leadership model around, he says very simplistically, he very jovially told me, मैं आप जैसे हार्वर्ड नहीं गया था. जो भी मुझे मालूम है सिर्फ भारतीय परंपरा ही है मुझे. Whatever he knows, it's only from people I learned. So I think I want to end my talk with, I know I'm taking that, I have 2 more minutes to take my complete 30 minutes. So Abhishek, I'm keeping track of time. No, I'm not going to take more time. I'll run out of stuff. I prepared for 30 minutes, I'll be ready only 30 minutes. उसकी ज़्यादा preparation नहीं है. So the last I want to say is, how does Gita exemplify public leadership? The Bhagavad Gita chapter 3 is not Karma Yoga. Just because the chapter says Karma Yoga, entire Gita is a combination of all the 4 yogas. We don't realize. Krishna, for our administrative and appreciation of our understanding, he knew is limited, so he broke it down in chapters in 18 and gave us. But it's just a way in which Vyasa must have told us how to read it. But it's a seamless combination of information, because we really cannot bifurcate life as Jnana, Raja Yoga, and Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. We are a combination of all this. It's very difficult to emerge into a particular silo. So I found 3 powerful messages of public action and how to deal with it in the entire Bhagavad Gita. The first is this Phalatyaga, as we are evolving ourselves as a public leader. Enormous pressure for people at the operational level. A DM, an SDM, they take decisions. Look at the crises that might have emerged when 30 people are. The finest cultural event is the Kumbh Mela, Mahakumbh that's happening. So much went into it. Right up to how to train the police. 1 year ago, UP government had taught. We had helped them unpack it. The capacity they'll need, the system needs. Close to 12% to 15% of the GSDP of Uttar Pradesh are coming up in 45 days. How do you even manage it? It's an enormous, 20 universities, international universities are camping there to understand this. The funny part was, we were teaching our police officers crowd management from a professor from Cambridge. That is appreciation of Indian knowledge. Now we have now stopped all that. We have created a repository of just Indianness which will be taught to our people. And this, whatever happened, shouldn't have happened. We shouldn't have lost 30 lives. But a very crude way of saying it is, a hardly noticeable population in comparison to the Mahakumbh was a Hajj pilgrimage, and how many thousands of people died. Nobody compares or talks about it. But I'm not saying they should die there or they should die here, nothing. I'm just saying, let's be very evidential and data-driven in our comparisons and opinions also. That's all I'm saying. Let's not get emotional and say it should not have happened. But we also have a way of looking at karma hai. And then we also go and say, Mahakumbh mein agar if he dies, maybe he has ticket as moksha ke liye. We have our own interpretation, but that's a coping mechanism. I'm not getting into that. But the officers on the ground, look at their next day, they have to act, they have to take decisions. They cannot simply get bogged down. If Phalatyaga is not part of their lives, how can they even get up next morning and go to work? So consequence of action is the beginning of your public leadership journey. The next thing is karma tyaga, which our officers don't understand. Vivekananda says it so beautifully. He says, neither seek nor avoid when it comes to work. He's just brilliant in his English expressions. He says, neither seek nor avoid. Unfortunately, I find our bureaucrats constantly seek or avoid. अरे यार मुझे तो ये पोस्टिंग मिल गया, इसमें तो क्या है, एग्जीक्यूटिव पोस्ट नहीं है, मुझे तो ट्रेनिंग एकेडमी भेज दिया ये लोग, पनिशमेंट ट्रांसफर है. एंड देन से मैं तो इतना अच्छा सेक्रेटरी हूँ, मुझे तो ये डिपार्टमेंट यूजलेस है, बजट सिर्फ 800 crores है. लेकिन मेरा बैचमेट को देखो 1,75,000 crores है. So you're seeking, avoiding, and therefore you compromise. So karma tyaga means you don't look at what actions you're asked to perform, you perform. And the final expression of public leadership is kartritva tyaga. The very identifying of the enjoyership is gone, but the ownership itself is gone. It is not about me as a performer, but I am allowing myself to be the instrument of change. By plugging into that superpower, it works through me, I have nothing. So wherever I am, whatever I do, I not only give up the enjoyership, I don't worry about what work I am doing, but I do it so well in the present moment of time with no attachment. Vivekananda says, intense action amidst inaction and inaction amidst action. He says detached attachment along with attached detachment. You cannot get a more powerful expression of Indic leadership than this. If we can do that, just imagine the public leaders this country will have, whether they are going to be in the space of politics or public institutions or in a small community run traditional tribal chieftain. It doesn't matter where we are. Or a university director or dean is also part of a public system. We don't see it all as all that. We see them as positions of authority and power. It's not. Indian leadership never recognizes authority and power. Authority and power is an instrument of change. And the real power is the power within. And the control of that power within is Indriya Nigraha that we speak about. And what our public leaders today need is this. And that is what India teaches us. We have to learn it. The problem is we have forgotten to learn it. And after we learn it, we should teach the world. That is the Vishwaguru Sandesh, because the world needs to be a better place. And the only way it can be made is, I have explained, my last chapter in my book is called, the epilogue is called the Dharma of Legacy and the Legacy of Dharma itself. Unless we take a dharmic approach, apply the principles of Purushartha, understand how we can balance ecology with economy. Like Vivekananda also said, you can't teach Bhagavad Gita on an empty stomach. So you can't just say Dharma. What does it mean in a practical sense? And apply it. We really cannot, especially excite people like all of you to participate in this journey of living this public leader's life. I'll stop here. Thank you.